Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully people will continue joining us. We have a really great crowd from all over the globe today, which is really wonderful. My name's Nicole Chrome. I'm the chair of the VEX group, and we want to thank you all for being with us. This is not exactly how we intended to be together today, but this is our 9th annual conference, and our theme this year is Reimagining Experience. So as Adrianne's slide right there says it, we've all been through quite a bit this year. So I just want to thank you all for making space in your world to join us here today. For those that aren't familiar with the VEX group, we are an all-volunteer group dedicated to providing professional development for those in front-facing positions in the arts and culture field. The conference is something we do annually, and it's one way that we kind of live out mission of doing that, along with a VEX Ed webinar series. We have an ambassador program, and we have other events, both virtual and in person, throughout the year. So if you are new to us, we hope you will stay connected after this conference. Sponsors have always been a huge part in keeping this conference accessible and affordable, and we want to thank our presenting sponsor, Gateway Ticketing Systems. And I would like to invite Chad, who I believe I saw in the room, to say a few words. Chad.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. So just on behalf of Gateway Ticketing, I just wanted to say thank you for allowing us to sponsor. VEX is a group, I think because of the roots of the area that you guys are from. Initially, it's very near and dear to our heart. And I know that, congratulations on 9 years. I think this is my 4th event. And I've made some great relationships. So anyone that is new, I know it's a little different this year, but you can really make some great relationships at VEX. And I hope that you'll take Nicole up on the offer to participate throughout the year. So I just wanted to say that I wish that I was welcoming everyone right now to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I know I was pretty excited to get there, but of course things aren't working out that way. So I did just real quick want to say and invite you all to look forward to 2021. It's going to get here sooner or later, and hopefully it'll be a new and bright year when it does. So there's 3 things that you can do, at least in regards to how I feel at Gateway Ticketing, to kick off 2021 right and hopefully make it a success. So if you all have your pens and paper handy, write this down. Go to gatewayticketing.com. All right, that's pretty simple. That's the #1 thing that you're gonna do. And then while you're there, I want you to check out, and this is the #2 thing, I want you to check out our Wednesday webinars. Now, I don't want anyone to rush over too quick because we are having one today, and of course we wanna see the VEX content today. But no worries, because we record them all, and you can find all the ones that we've done so far and all the ones that we're gonna do in the future there if you wanna sign up and watch those. But the reason why I say to do them, you know, webinars can be a little wonky. You know, they're hit or miss sometimes. But these ones in particular have been called out by the LA Times and mentioned us in an article with a very, very large amusement park that I'm not going to mention because of their legal might. So I don't know if they like me talking about them. But so the LA Times have called out our Wednesday webinars, and also Amusement Today gave us a golden ticket award. We didn't even ask him to do that. Amazing stuff. So check those out, and also check out our Tuesday talks. Again, everything is recorded, so you know you don't have to feel the need to be on the spot and get to these webinars. We'll record them for you. Just go sign up, and we'll send you a link. So that's the #2 thing you can do. The content is amazing. There are probably people in this room right now that have been panelists or at least have attended our Wednesday webinars. And then the 3rd thing I want you to do, and this one you can do, you can go and sign up. And we have been giving demos. So, you know, normally if you wanted to see ways that you could improve your in-house ticketing, right, you would you know, work with me or someone else at the company, and you'd get a demo. These are kind of more, I guess what I would say is these are more open, right? It's large groups of people, but we're going to show you ways that you can use our software to come out of this strong in 2021. So those are the 3 things that I invite you to do. Again, head to gatewayticketing.com to check out our Wednesday webinars and Tuesday talks. There'll be another one in 2 weeks. And 1021, we have a demo set up for a large group specifically of arts, what we call arts and heritage type customers, which most of you would fall into. So those are the three things. We'll get out of this. You guys are really important. I went to a museum last weekend, and it's great. It's a stress reliever, and it's one place where you know you're going to go and get fact. So I love what you guys do. Thank you very much, and have a great session.
Thank you so much, Chad. So, as you should have all received, to navigate the conference and sessions, you've all received a link to a page with all the individual links to each session. At any point, we are having a VEX lounge. So if you have any questions or you just want to talk to any VEX folks, one of us will always be present in this VEX lounge. So you are welcome to enter and exit rooms as you like. As Pat put in the chat box, closed captioning is available, and we'll try to make sure that happens in each of the sessions. If you wouldn't mind in your names, if you would just include your pronouns, you would just right click over your name and you can edit what your name is. And all sessions are going to be recorded, and we will be sending out the links to registered attendees after this conference. So if you've not had enough Zoom at the end of our sessions today, we are having an additional happy hour and bingo event. So you can stick around, win some prizes, and meet some of your fellow colleagues. So as we get ready for our keynote, I would like to bring up our keynote sponsor, Rick from Social Good. Rick, are you here?
I am.
Hey, Rick, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Hey everyone, this is Rick from Social Good Software. First of all, I want to go ahead and thank everybody here at VEX. This is our first year here. We have some of our team members here. They're super excited. Shout out to Chris on my team. And I also want to give a shout out to Mark, Nicole, and Alex, the ones that personally invited us to sponsor today's conference. Really super excited about guest experiences and how guests interact with our organization and how you guys can really improve that experience. For those of you who have not heard of us, we work specifically with all true customers to help them create an amazing guest experience through software that requires little to no technical know-how. So if you're currently using the Ultra system, you're running into some issues, some trouble, that's kind of where we step in and really fill in some gaps and really bring the system to life to really fill you guys' requirements, needs that you have with your organization. That's pretty much what we do. So if you're an Ultra customer, happy to chat. You can reach us at socialgoodsoftware.com. We're always happy to help.
Thank you so much. And more information is available on both sponsors on the digital swag bag that has been created for you too. Or these guys should be around for a little bit longer today. So with that, I would like to welcome our first keynote, Adrianne Russell, who is a very great bio, very museum educator, writer, and arts consultant. She has written and presented about the intersections of art, equity, and the culture for fusion, Temporary Art Review, Smithsonian Magazine, PBS Parents, American Alliance of Museums, Museum Next, Museum Computer Network, the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, and her blog, Cabinet of Curiosities. She's also the co-founder of the Digital Humanities Project, hashtag Museums Respond to Ferguson, and interrogation of anti-Blackness in museums, and hashtag Museum Workers Speak, an action-oriented platform for social change at the intersection of labor, access, and inclusion. He also serves as project advisor and contributor for the collaborative project Museums as Site for Social Action, which seeks to align museums with more equitable and inclusive practices. You can find her adding museums to her waitlist, maybe she'll find a few today, discovering indie bookstores, and listening to K-pop. So if you have any questions during the talk, Adrianne is open to you asking them as you go. Otherwise, there will be time at the end for some Q&A. And with that, I would love to bring up Adrianne. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And it's really always kind of disorienting to hear that stuff read back to you, because you're like, damn, I did a lot of stuff. And it's just kind of cool to hear that. So yeah, I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your day to be here. Like this first slide says, everything is just harder now than it usually is. Everybody's kind of going through things at different levels, but we're all going through something. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with me. And I'm hoping to learn from you as much as you hopefully learn from me. And well, I think I just kind of want to take a moment to recognize that. There's really big things happening right now, especially if you're in the United States, and all over the world, things are happening, but we're really kind of in a predicament right now. So the fact that we can all still get together and talk about something that we love and that we enjoy means a lot to me. So thank you so much for being here. So as I mentioned, the K-pop love. My name is Adrianne Russell. I also love writing. I write young adult fiction, and I love taking naps, and that's kind of one of the side benefits of working from home at this point. Naps can happen whenever I like. I also am like really taking advantage of curbside pickup, and so I'm going all around the city where I live and trying to find the best sandwiches I can. And that picture is from the last concert I went to pre-COVID, which was BTS at Soldier Field in Chicago. It was really, really cold, but it was an amazing show. And so I like to look at that to give me hope and think about the things I want to do once we get past COVID. So yeah, find me on Adrianne Russell at Twitter. There's the hashtag for the conference today in case you guys want to comment and go along. But yeah, let's get going. So the question I always ask anybody who asks me about helping them with their museum is, what are you even here for? Like, what is the goal that you have when you work, when you create programming, when you do anything that has to do with the museum? And my fear is that if museums do not start paying attention to the things that are really important in terms of their existence, they're going to other themselves into obsolescence. And basically by othering the people that come to visit them, they're going to make themselves irrelevant fairly soon. And we are probably already seeing a little bit of that as museums try to come back from COVID closures. So a little bit about me. I am pretty much a lifetime museum goer. As a kid, I had a lot of caring adults who took me to my hometown, large encyclopedic art museum, and just kind of let us wander around and explore things. And we went to that museum on Saturdays because that was the free day, but you didn't have to pay to go in. And a interesting plot twist, I ended up working there as an adult and got into the archives and discovered that the free day was Saturday, and that was the day that Black people were allowed to come to the museum, the only day. And it's kind of, the segregation went away, but the tradition of letting the others come in on the weekend stayed for a long, long time until they ultimately moved to free admission. But one of the things I noticed when I was younger was that there weren't always a lot of Black people in the museum, unless it was a school group or something like that, but not very many grown-ups, except the people that were working. The people that were cleaning the floors and doing the operational stuff, the people that were guarding the art, those all tended to be Black people or people of color. But if anyone else did anything in the museum, I didn't know because I never saw anyone else. And then when I actually became a worker, I realized that all those other people were back in the back behind, closed doors. And it was very rare to see them out in the public with everyone else. So my very first job was basically being an administrative assistant and having a very forward-facing position. I literally sat out in the hallway in an office that had a sliding window like you might see at a doctor's office and a doorbell. And that's basically how I encountered everyone. I was right next to the bathroom, so most of the questions I got was, where is the bathroom, even though it was right next door. How do I find this, how do I find that? So very quickly I learned that I would have to become an expert on the museum that I worked at, because they saw a face, they saw a person, they had questions, and I needed to be able to find those answers. So my experience with that very early on was that, okay, I have a lot of authority in this position, a lot of responsibilities, pardon me, and very little authority in this position. I didn't really have the authority to make too many decisions, to dictate kind of my workflows or any of those kinds of things. But if something went wrong, then it most certainly was my fault. So I think that's kind of indicative of how museums, and that's of all kinds, not just art museums, but zoos, aquariums. If you're in that frontline forward-facing position, you're going to catch a lot of heat for things that go wrong. You may not necessarily get the accolades when they go right. And you have to be a subject matter expert on the entire place because people are coming to you for the information. You're out front. So because of that, I asked a lot of questions, and that probably didn't endear me to my supervisors, but I had lots of questions about why are we doing things this way? This doesn't make sense. People are telling us they want to experience things this way, but we're setting it up like this. Why are the signs so small? Why are there not enough seats? I mean, these are just things that I would try to communicate to the people that worked with me, and it didn't always go over very well. But I still asked. And so eventually, that gets me to this last bit about being the art museum outcast. Eventually, at some point, it came to the time that I said, okay, I can't progress any further in this position. They're not allowing me to do the things that I know that can make the job great and fun. And I just decided, okay, it was time to go. So that's kind of where I've been. I had a second job after that at a small art museum at a state college, the Beach Museum of Art at Kansas State University, and actually really enjoyed that because it was smaller. It wasn't a large encyclopedic museum, and it was able to move a lot more quickly. And I had a totally different audience. I had college students, so that was a lot of fun, and getting to work with educators on the collegiate level and being able to be interdisciplinary like that. I thought that was great. But eventually that position, I did have to leave because of racism and discrimination. So that's kind of why I feel like I've always loved art museums and they haven't necessarily loved me back. So that's kind of where I'm at. But now I get the great task of talking to people that work with museums and still trying to help them figure out how to do them better. And that's where the projects like Museum Workers Speak and Museums Ron Ferguson and Mass Action come in, because my goal has always been, if you're going to go out into the public and try to position yourself as an expert in something, but you're not well-versed in cultural competency, if you don't have any kind of training about anti-racism and anti-bias, then you're basically just going to replicate all the nonsense that happens inside the museum out in the general public, and that's going to impact everything that you do. So yeah, this is how I have got there. So the thing that I'm noticing a lot, especially as we're gearing up for reopenings and having to deal with virtual programming, is that museums are pretty heavily focused on product over people. We all know that the reason that the museum is there is to collect and preserve the material culture, but the focus sometimes becomes so heavily object-based that museums forget about the people that actually made the culture. They forget about what it means to have ownership of something that belongs to other cultures, and the immense responsibility that they have to present that material in a way that honors the people and the communities that it comes from. So one of the things I always try to ask when I talk to people is like, what kind of museums do you have? Is it an object-centered museum or is it a people-centered museum? And it becomes pretty obvious if you just kind of speak to someone long enough, or ask. And what I usually like to do when I was able to physically go into museums is ask the people that worked in the front line, so it's the front of house positions. I asked the visitor services desk, I asked the gallery attendants, I asked, what kind of museum is this? That's who I want to know from, because that's what's going to be able to tell you what you're working with. So in an objects in a museum, basically the collection is over everything. It's all about the stuff. And they love their stuff, and they don't necessarily care if you love it too, but they're going to tell you that you should love it, and you're not going to really hear much about why you don't. And so because of that, certain workers in those museums are prioritized, the ones that work with collections, the ones that curate collections, the ones that present them, They seem to be of a very high priority in terms of hierarchy, in terms of pay, promotion, all these kinds of things. And so that centers power in the hands of very few people inside that organization, which is not good. And so a lot of decisions are made at a kind of top level without really considering anyone else at the bottom. And because they are focused on things, they are really concerned about markets, special interests from boards and donors. And we're now seeing, because of AA and in the art museum world, because of lax deaccessioning, we're now seeing kind of a fire sale of museums that are selling off collection-based things to get the money that they're supposedly losing due to COVID. So if you're people-centered, you're really trying to be equitable. You're trying to make sure that everyone who works in the museum and everyone who visits the museum feels equal and welcome and treasured. And there's a sharing of power, the way that the decisions are made, the way that things are structured, the way the org chart is drawn out. It's kind of flattening the organization. And it values the labor that people are giving you, and that shows up in the way that people are paid, that shows in how promotions and raises are done. And so that's something that happens internally, and it all comes back out to the public when these things happen. And when things go wrong, they make restitution. So first they admit that something's wrong, which is really hard for museums to do. And then they do the best that they can to make it right in whatever form that the aggrieved party feels is most acceptable. So I think you can kind of be in the middle. It's not as extreme to be one or the other, but there has to be some understanding that these things need to work together in order to make your museum fun and enjoyable to work in, and also fun and enjoyable to visit. I don't think people realize how clearly these things will come across to people visiting your museum. It's not hard to pick up on these kinds of things. If I go into a museum and I'm looking around and I don't see any Black people, I don't see any people of color, if I see everyone concentrated in certain positions, if I see that visitors of color are treated differently, I mean, these are all things that are going to be impressed upon me as a place that is not safe, that I don't want to come back to, and I'm not going to suggest anyone else go there. And that often happens before I even look at a single object, because it happens at the front door. You know, so can I even get to your front door? Is it accessible? There's all these kinds of things that happen to you before you even enter to see an object. So my preference is that you're more people-centered. I mean, you think about what it's like to move through those spaces before you focus so much about what we have in the collection. So to prepare for this, I went to go look at a lot of different reports, and I know they're not always the most fun things, but I am a nonprofit wonk, so I love reading reports and figures. And so this Museums Economics Age report came out 2018, and it was a joint effort between Oxford Economics, AAM, and I believe it had support from the Mellon Foundation. And so 850 million is the number of, plus actually, the number of visits to US museums annually, right? So this is 850 million impressions. And this includes physical visits. It also includes digital visits. So this is the amount of times that you have someone coming in and making an assessment of your organization, your museum. And so I kind of don't like to fixate too much on these numbers, because when museums are trying to prove their worth, they always kind of lean really heavily on economics, right? So we bring in this much tax money, we bring in these many jobs, we do this, we do that, as to prove their value. And I feel like if they did a better job of focusing on people and on equity and experience and how we engage in this fight, you wouldn't have to make such a strong case for the economic viability of a museum, because the story would tell itself. And I see that here where I live in the Midwest, there's a lot of yearly just kind of begging with your hat in your hand to the city and the state and saying, you know, can you help us? Can you help us? Here's all the money we bring in. And very few people talk about what it's like to experience a place and what it means to have a place that you can go to see cool things, to learn stories about people that aren't like yourself, and to just kind of relax and have a place to just be where you're not bothered. And so that's the kind of experience I like to have when I go to museums. So that number is staggering because I really just didn't realize it was that many. But at the same time, there's an outside, I think, impression that when we talk about museums, we're talking about art museums, and we're really talking about everything. We're talking about, you know, zoos, aquariums, historic houses, historic sites, all those history museums, science museums, all those things together, and that's what makes up that number. So I know that things tend to be art focused, but it really is about everyone at this point. So usually when I go do a presentation about these kinds of things, or I talk to people about it, the first thing somebody wants to say to me is, it's like, oh, let's develop a pipeline. Let's figure out a way to get more people in who don't look like us. And then that's kind of when, like, I roll my eyes and I try to keep my face together, but it doesn't always work. Because it really is not about funneling people into a system if the system is terrible. Right. So if you're setting people up to go into a system that's bigoted or homophobic or racist or any number of things, all you're doing is setting people up for harm. And so I tend to not like the idea of a pipeline and just funneling people in to places that are going to be harmful for them. And part of the problem with the way that museums operate is that we are trained, and I am not immune to this, we are trained to be risk averse. We are trained to move very slowly and methodically. We are trained to make sure that we have everything absolutely right before we put it out to the public. And museums don't like to be wrong. They don't like to admit they're wrong because that's seen as failure. So avoidance is usually what happens when something comes up that brings to light the stark inequalities that exist in museums and in the communities that they serve. This summer was a really good example of a lot of museums trying to respond to social upheaval and Black Lives Matter, and just really doing a terrible, terrible job of it. Yeah, like the list is long of how many people really made a mistake and put their foot in it because they were trying to do something that was false and it was perceived as false. And as soon as they did it, you know, people who worked there, people who visited there immediately came back with, no, this is not who you are. This is who you are. And to some museums' credit, they said, yeah, you're right. And to others, they literally just avoided it and said, act like it didn't happen. We put our statement out. That's it, on to business as usual. So that's part of the aversion, the distraction, the deflecting, the flat out ignoring. When brought up, the people say, oh, but we have this artist, this Black artist, we have this, we have that. Those are all distractions. That's people basically saying, we've done our part. We put our message up. We said we support Black lives. What else do you want us to do? And then on the other end, there's also the ones that just completely abstained from it and said, listen, we don't get into that politics business. We just present our pretty things and you can just take it or leave it. And we all know that there's no such thing as neutrality when it comes to life in general. And certainly there's no neutrality when it comes to an organization whose sole purpose is to collect things, present them, from other cultures. You can't extract that out of the business of museum work. So shout out to Museums Are Not Neutral with Mike and Latanya, because that is a very welcome reminder every time that just the physical act of collecting is something that is not neutral, and it shows bias sometimes, and it shows the intention. And so how can you be neutral about it when you're making that kind of choice? So yeah, I'm anti-pipeline. Sorry about that, y'all. So one of the things that really speaks to me is this idea of freedom and being able to move just throughout the day, throughout the life, to be able to just make your own choices and have autonomy. And one of the things that I think we should consider when we're designing anything that has to do with museums is autonomy of space and agency of movement. And that could be metaphorically, that could be literally. And so we're making judgments and we're making values of how we feel about our people that come into our spaces. Sometimes just by their very design, just by how we instruct our employees to engage with them as they move through a space. So there's a lot of work that has to be done, I think, on the internal level before any museum can really get out there and say, hey, we're doing something for equity and inclusion. It's just way too forward-facing. It doesn't look internally into the culture. And it doesn't take into account that the people that we work with are free, autonomous human beings and deserve to have that respected as they come into the workspace. So as a person who has done a very forward-facing job in museums, and as someone who's also worked in like a managerial supervisory session area, I never wanted to feel like I was being controlled as a visitor or as a worker. And I certainly didn't want to feel like I was controlling others. And so I've always tried to encourage people, especially those who feel like they don't have a lot of control or authority in their position, to just kind of try to manage up and assert that in the smallest ways that you can. And sometimes you have to get loud, sometimes you have to be quiet about it, but know that there are other people who feel that same way about you, about that work, and they're probably sitting right next to you, and they're afraid to say something because the risk is so high. And museums do tend to work in a kind of scarcity model. So we all know that there's so many more people for the jobs than there are jobs for them. And so it really does seem a bit terrifying to try to take this approach when you're dealing in your work. But it is, I feel, one of the most advantageous ways of operating in a space when you're dealing with objects, a lot of them that have been acquired kind of dubiously. You have to move with some kind of sense of purpose and value from top to bottom. So yeah, that's basically it. I want to thank y'all for letting me go on like that. I know I sometimes feel like I'm preaching to the choir, and that's great because a lot of times we're not surrounded by people that share kind of our like values. And I know that you all would not be here if you didn't care about what you do and who you do it in service to. So I want to thank y'all for doing that. The conditions right now, as we talked about, are not ideal. Before COVID, they were not ideal, and they certainly are not ideal at this time. But as a museum visitor, myself more than a worker, I really want to thank you all for continuing to try to give us meaningful and engaging experiences in any way that you can, because it does matter. And I want everyone to know that that work is important, despite what the pay scale says, despite what anyone says when they're trying to figure out what to cut next from a budget. Your work is really, really important, and I'm glad you do it. So thank you so much. Do y'all have any questions for me?
Thank you so much. So you're welcome to put questions in the chat, or you're welcome to also unmute yourselves and ask away.
I have a question. So as being a person of color and having worked in a museum, how would you say that they can improve, a process or a place to be more welcoming? And I know you give tons of examples. Like, what's something practical that somebody can do right away?
Practical, okay. One of the most important things I think they can do is when they're posting for positions to list how much they pay, list if there's any kind of benefits such as relocation expenses. They should be very forthcoming about what their museum's values are in terms of diversity and equity and inclusion. Anything you can do in that announcement to indicate that you have given these issues even the slightest bit of thought, I think is important. Because when you're looking at it, you're thinking, okay, is this a place that's going to be safe for me? Is this a part of the world that's going to be safe for me and my family potentially? Can I afford to live there? Is it going to be hard for me? So these are important things. And I think a lot of times museums take for granted a lot of information when they're making these job descriptions, right? And just to be real transparent about everything, you know, because a lot of times you know what they're trying to give you kind of the best, present themselves the best, which is what you want to do, but you want to be very honest about what you're setting people up to do. And the job that requires 80 hours a week from you that only pays $35,000 a year is probably not going to seem attractive to most people, but particularly a person of color. Yeah, so just be transparent, tell the truth about these jobs. Don't make me have to call you, 50 times to get you to give me a salary range. That's a good question.
Ready? And Tazia, it looks like you had your hand up. Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh no.
Oh, there we go. I think we're still having trouble hearing you. All right. Now I'm muted. Okay. While she's working on that, there is a question in the chat. Do you have recommendations on where or how museums can advertise jobs to gain more diverse candidates?
Okay. I'm not sure how it is where you all live. Well, here in the United States and in my part of the Midwest, our city has several media outlets that are based on different communities and cultures. We have a newspaper that caters to Black audience. And so those are kind of outlets that are always there and have always been there, but no one really thinks about advertising with them for anything. No, I mean, not just positions, but just like your programming and anything that happens there. No one really contacts them for ad buys or anything like that. So that's one of the ways I think that museums could do a better job, is just kind of looking around their community and figuring out, well, what kind of media outlets do we have? It doesn't always have to be the same very large newspaper or very large website or whatever it has to be. There's a lot of bloggers and people that blog special interests that can help you get the word out about your positions. Universities and colleges that are around have job banks that I don't very often see museums advertising on, at least locally where I am. I think that's probably one of the things. So, I mean, when you have a PR department, I think they're kind of used to doing things a certain way. They have their contact at this newspaper, they have this, they have that. They're like, oh, we know about the big handful of job placement sites. But you really have to get a little more creative and broaden your reach. And even when you go to the universities, you can't go to the same, private art school that majority only white kids go to. You have to really broaden your reach and think about who am I trying to attract and where can I find them? I mean, my city has job fairs all the time. Even my county has them. And it seems like the same kind of industries show up over and over again. You very rarely see humanities, arts, and culture groups there. So yeah, just gotta think a little broader.
Great. Natasha, do we get you? Still no. Oh, okay. A question from Kevin. I'm in management, so I'm the one yelling diversity in meetings. Any practical advice for dealing with board?
With the board? Oh, man.
And a follow-up question to that from Eileen on the same track. What's your most productive conversation with a board member?
Okay. So I think the thing that most boards have in common is that they do want to do what they perceive is what's best for the museum, right? So they wouldn't be there, most of them volunteering their time, if they didn't care in some kind of way about what you're doing. So the thing I always try to remember is like, okay, this is a pretty favorable captive audience. But what you have to try to get them to understand, and a lot of this is about training boards too, because a lot of people go to serve on them and don't realize that there is actual training that can be done to help kind of get your board to understand what, you know, a nonprofit is, what it means to be a good steward, what it is to have good governance. I mean, these are all things that you can try to encourage them to do in order to make them become better board members. But people tend to be very defensive when you come at them with, like, gosh, you guys are being just really big bigots. You're being really big racist. You have to figure out a way to couch it and get them to understand what they're doing. So the way that I always approach it is what appeals to them. Well, most boards like to talk about money. Most boards like to talk about, you know, collections and gaining things. And so just kind of, you have to tell a story. You have to make this case that, you know, if we want to continue to exist and be relevant to our city, our state, our town, and we're going to have to change the way that we do business. And from a humanities standpoint, it makes sense. From a fiscal standpoint, it makes sense. So if they're really economic focused, then that's when you pull out all that big data and you tell them about the 850 million visits and how that translates into funds going forward. If that's what they're keyed into, if they're into education, you talk to them about how, you know, you support K-12 and how those kind of people grow up to be lifelong museum learners and visitors. And so you just kind of have to know the audience that you're encountering. And sometimes boards will have multiple different points, entry points, but you just kind of have to tell the story. So my most productive meeting, I think, it was that kind of meeting where I basically just said, okay, listen, I know that you guys are usually all about the money, but I need to tell you these stories about these people that come in to this museum who've never been here before, who didn't know anything about it, and left kind of changed in a good way. And here's how we did it. And here's how we can continue to do it if you bring us the resources and things that we need. Because what I notice is that a lot of times these people will sit on board sometimes for years and no one will ever do a direct ask to them. You give them a direct action item to say, okay, here's what I need and here's how you can help me get it. So yeah, I just think being honest with them, not being afraid of them, and not allowing them to kind of force you to creep on the mission, which can be hard. It really can be hard. But if you're in the position to be in the room with them, just know that you probably already have a lot more power than you realize. And you just kind of need to like leverage that.
Great. Okay, another question from Christine. Do you have any museums that come to mind that are particularly successful at being people-oriented rather than object-centered?
Oh, gosh. There's a lot. Mostly there, and I'm going to give my shout out to my favorite, like historic houses. Historic houses have done a really, really good job of kind of reframing the story. So places like, you know, Monticello and the Old Salem House. I mean, these are places that have kind of, you know, what we call touchy histories, and they're encountering kind of like at the base level a lot of bigotry and trained ignorance about history in the United States especially. And so I think when you have these kind of places where people are kind of embodying a history, they might be reenactors, it might be these kind of things, they've taken really good steps to kind of transition that history into something that reflects what's true, and also kind of reflects the potential for us to always be better and to improve. So the Whitney Plantation always stands out to me down in New Orleans as a place that has kind of remixed and reconfigured what it means to kind of embody everything from the top down, just from the way they work internally, also to the way they present material. and the way that they work within the community that they're embedded in is really super important. So they kind of get the gold star from me.
So you started touching on it there, but what, at the museums that are doing a good job, what are they put out? Maybe atmosphere, actions, you kind of started touching on it there, but.
Yeah, the way that they engage the material that they have, right? So whether it's objects, whether it's story, whether it's whatever it is, they take an approach of, okay, where does this come from? Who makes it? What was their life like? How can I communicate this to the people that are coming through here? And then giving the people who are tasked with that interpretation just kind of a lot of range and how they can interact with people that come through. So they're not kind of locked into any kind of rigid structure. They have a framework, but they're allowed to kind of to move based on what that touring group or whoever it is kind of wants to go in. And they're able to challenge things without being afraid of reprisal from the museum. So if someone comes to them and says something like, oh, at the Whitney, for example, well, it looks like they were taken very good care of. They had a place to sleep, the enslaved people. That person knows that they are empowered to say, well, actually, that is not how it was. And this is how we know this. And here's what we, have learned. And they can do that and not feel like, well, if that person goes on to, Yelp or whatever and says, oh, I got treated so terribly at the Whitney, they know that they're going to be backed up and supported. So I think just that idea of empowerment, being autonomous, being able to make decisions on the spot, and then being very well trained in the subject matter, and doing a lot of internal work to get people's mindset. So they've done a lot of work with challenging their own bias and within their organization. They actually use the mass action toolkit that we developed to kind of take their staff through a lot of these exercises and do a lot of this training before they even go out to the public. So that's what makes the difference. They've taken the time to do the work internally on their culture. And so it reflects in the work that they do in the community.
Great. Okay. Do you have any suggestions for those frontline workers with disabilities?
Do they mean in terms of just making it through their workday, or what is it? Do they have any?
There's no, Lindsay, if you want to speak up.
Or it's in terms of getting accommodations maybe for their work?
Because they're contractors, do you have any suggestions?
Okay. It's kind of a rough thing to do because I have multiple disabled, so I'm also manage that as well. But as a contractor, it depends on the kind of work you're doing, but everything that you deal with in terms of a workplace is covered technically by the ADA. So whether you're contracted, whether you're on paid staff or whatever, they are bound to follow the rules and the guidelines set out by the federal ADA standards. And so it's one thing it's always tricky to disclose before you get positions, because we know that sometimes people are taken out of the running for things if they disclose disability, and that really sucks. And that's a condition that we've dealt with for a long time. But once you're contracted, then you should be able to say, here's what I need in order to get this work done, and receive positive feedback. Now, if you don't, it's very hard. It's hard to know like when to fight and when to walk away. That's always the struggle that I was with. And that was my last position, was like that too. I basically was fired for asking for accommodations. So I can't give you any kind of easy pat answer. I wish I could. I can tell you that it sucks, that you have to fight all the time to be respected and to get the accommodations that everyone deserves. I think now we're starting to see with what's happening with all this work from home from COVID, that it's very easy for places to accommodate people when they have the wherewithal and the mindset that they think it's important. So I think there's a momentum here that can be leveraged moving forward if you're able to transition to virtual workspaces, to letting people work remotely, to setting people up with home offices, to giving them all these things that they need in order to do the job somewhere else, then there's really, really no excuse to not do it all the time for everyone who needs it. So yeah, and if you're not like me, and you're not a persistent loudmouth, then finding other people who kind of feel the same way you do, and they're out there. And there's national and international organizations that don't necessarily think about museum workers or arts and culture workers in terms of disability accommodation. So they're out there for us to hook up with and get involved in our particular segment of the working industry. We tend to be really insular like that, and we don't have to be. I mean, there's a lot of organizations out here that are doing that work to advocate for us, and would probably really love it if we, as a segment of the economy, spoke up and said, hey, we're here too. So yeah.
Great. All right, last question that I have. We have a few more minutes. Any thoughts on museums and reopening after COVID?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts. A lot of my good friends still work in museums and work locally here. And so I've been watching with really great interest these plans to reopen. In my state, we have like a humanities council that basically got all the orgs together and said, let's draft up our own guidelines for reopening. And so they kind of signed off on themselves and said, we're good to go. And so every person that I knew that actually worked in these places was like, no, we're not good to go. We're not good to go. So I feel like too many organizations are rushing to go back, and they haven't really done kind of the basic things you would need done in order to keep workers and guests safe, right? So if you haven't gone in and retrofitted your building so that air is not traveling, through any kind of duct, because we know we have an airborne illness that we're dealing with, and you're basically just saying, oh, I'm going to put out some sanitation stations and that's it. That's not enough. It's not enough to protect your workers. It's not enough to protect anyone who comes through there. I think instead of being stressed out about visitors paying to keep the organization going, more of these organizations could do a better job of engaging their boards and asking them to give them the funding that they need to float for as long as they need to float. A lot of these people on a lot of these boards are extremely wealthy, and they know a lot of extremely wealthy people. And instead of doing that kind of ask, the first thing is to cut salaries, to cut jobs, furlough people, and particularly disproportionately, those are people of color that get cut first. So I'm not sure what most people can do in terms of stopping their employer from opening. I mean, it's really not much you can do, especially if you're in a forward-facing or front of house position. I know this. But there are things that you can kind of do as a collective. If you can get some of your coworkers to kind of agree with you on the conditions that you might need in order to do this work as safe as you possibly can, and then presenting those to your bosses, quote unquote. I know several places that has worked. Now, it's not as far as step as unionizing, which is also a great thing, but that's a long process. So I know a couple of organizations where people have gotten together, and it's education departments, but basically have said, listen, we need to have masks, we need to have gloves, we need to have this, we need to have that. You have to limit the number of people that can come into the building. You have to space everything out as far as you possibly can. So I hope that that's something that people will feel comfortable doing moving forward. It's very scary. Oh, can y'all still hear me? Okay. But yeah, I don't think, if I have to be quite honest, I don't think most of them are ready to go back. But instead of trying to figure out a way to do things differently, museums tend to be very reflexive and go back on what they know as opposed to trying anything different. So I really just hope that everyone can stay as safe as possible, but I don't think they're ready.
Okay. Any last questions? Okay. Well, Adrianne, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. We're getting tons of great comments in the chat. Everybody really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. For those sticking with us the rest of the afternoon, your options for your next session are strengths and differences or coronavirus and digital innovation. So they will start at 1:15. You have a few minutes to stretch your legs, and we do have some options for you on the digital swag bag if you want to check that out, including a playlist from Spotify that Pat has put together.
Nice.
So if anybody needs anything during the next 2 days, really, those of us on VEX, you're welcome to reach out. That is Dan, Cindy, Krista, Pat, Kyle, and myself. Some of us have the backgrounds going on. You're welcome to reach out to us individually, or you can always get to us at the info@visitorexperience.group. I am checking that every minute. So we thank you so much for being here. We look forward to spending more time with you over the next couple days, and have a great next session.